Carol adjusted the rearview mirror for the third time, not because she needed to, but to distract herself from her growing irritation. She'd been dreading this trip for weeks. Attending Lucy's wedding was non-negotiable. They'd been best friends since childhood. But the idea of spending 20 hours in a car with a stranger was less appealing than enduring a root canal. Antonella arrived 10 minutes late, a gym bag slung over her shoulder, and a bottle of water in hand. Her dark hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and she wore a casual tank top that showed off her toned arms. She sized up Carol with a glance. "You must be Carol," Antonella said, her Argentine accent thick and unmistakable. "And you must be late," Carol replied tersely. Antonella smirked but said nothing, tossing her bag into the trunk and slipping into the driver's seat. Carol frowned. This was her car. "I'm driving," Carol said, opening the driver's door. "No offense, Princessa, but I've got a better sense of direction. Besides, I don't trust GPS." Carol reluctantly handed over the keys, already regretting the trip. The first hour was silent. Carol scrolled through her phone, pretending to be engrossed, while Antonella hummed to the faint rhythm of the radio. The tension was palpable. "Do you always hum that loudly?" Carol finally snapped. Antonella glanced over, amused. "Do you always criticize people you just met?" "Only when they take over my car." Antonella laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that caught Carol off guard. "All right, you're funny. Let's call it even for now." Carol rolled her eyes, but allowed herself a small smile. As the miles stretched on, the initial truce unraveled. Antonella missed an exit because she insisted on following road signs instead of the GPS. Carol's curt "I told you so" earned her a sharp glare. By the time they reached a gas station, they were both fuming. Carol refused to chip in for snacks, claiming Antonella owed her for the detour. Antonella retaliated by buying the spiciest chips she could find, as she found Carol hated spice when she asked for less spicy snacks. "Seriously? Are you 12? Carol asked, glaring as Antonella casually munched on the chips. "Just lightening the mood, Princessa," Antonella said with a wink. Their argument reached its peak when the car jolted unexpectedly. Antonella pulled over, and both women stepped out to find a flat tire. "This is your fault," Carol said, throwing her hands up. "My fault? I didn't put nails on the road," Antonella shot back. They stared at the damaged tire, neither willing to make the first move. Finally, Antonella sighed. "All right, stay here. I'll handle it." Carol watched as Antonella worked with surprising efficiency, her muscular arms flexing as she replaced the tire. For the first time, Carol noticed the determination in her expression. "Impressive," Carol admitted when Antonella finished. "Glad to know I'm finally earning your approval," Antonella replied with a grin. The flat tire incident had shifted something between them. Antonella was no longer just a stranger with a cocky attitude, and Carol was no longer just a blonde with a biting wit. Yet, the silence in the car afterward was comfortable for the first time. As the GPS directed them down another stretch of monotonous highway, Antonella suddenly veered off at an exit. "What are you doing?" Carol exclaimed, gripping the door handle. "Relax, Princessa. I saw a sign for a scenic overlook. Trust me, you'll love it." "I didn't sign up for detours," Carol huffed, though part of her was intrigued. They pulled up to a secluded parking area surrounded by towering pines. A short walk brought them to a stunning overlook. Below, a valley stretched out endlessly, the river winding like a silver ribbon. "Wow," Carol whispered, the annoyance melting from her voice. "Told you," Antonella said, leaning casually against the railing, her arms crossed. They stood side by side, the view so breathtaking that it demanded silence. Finally, Carol broke it. "Why'd you come to the U.S.? Antonella hesitated, then shrugged. "My parents wanted better opportunities. It was hard at first, new language, new culture. I was the weird foreign kid for a long time. But my mom always said, if you don't belong, create a place where you do. So here I am, trying to figure it out." Carol nodded, her gaze still on the valley. "I get that. I've always felt out of place too. Corporate life isn't for me, but it's what's expected, you know?" "Expected by who?" Antonella asked, turning to face her. Carol shrugged. avoiding her gaze. My family, mostly. And myself, I guess. Antonella smiled softly. You're allowed to expect something different. Something better. For the first time in a long time, Carol felt seen. That night, they stopped at a roadside motel. The neon sign flickered, and the room smelled faintly of mildew, but it was the only option for Miles. The room had 2 twin beds, separated by a narrow nightstand. Cozy, Antonella joked as she tossed her bag onto one of the beds. Carol wrinkled her nose. I wouldn't call it that. After a quick dinner of gas station snacks, they found themselves lying in their respective beds, staring at the ceiling. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Do you ever wonder what you'd do if you weren't afraid? Carol asked suddenly. Antonella turned her head toward her. All the time. Fear's a funny thing, though. It only has power if you let it. Carol propped herself up on one elbow. So, what would you do? I'd open my own gym, Antonella admitted. A place where people can feel strong, no matter where they come from or what they've been through. Carol smiled. That sounds amazing. What about you? Antonella asked, her voice softer now. I'd quit my job and travel. Photograph everything. Live out of a van if I had to. Antonella grinned. That's bold for someone who freaked out over a flat tire. Hey, Carol protested, laughing despite herself. Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence. You're braver than you think, Antonella said quietly. And you're not as tough as you pretend to be, Carol replied. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for a moment, it felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. The next morning, they stumbled upon a small-town festival. Colorful banners hung between lampposts, and the smell of fried food wafted through the air. Let's check it out, Antonella said, already parking the car. We're going to be late, Carol protested half-heartedly. We're always late. It's our thing now, Antonella teased, grabbing Carol's hand and pulling her toward the festivities. They wandered through the festival, sampling funnel cakes and marveling at handmade crafts. Antonella insisted on trying every game, from ring toss to balloon darts, winning a stuffed bear that she promptly handed to Carol. For the memories, she said with a wink. The highlight of the day was the Ferris wheel. Carol hesitated at first, but Antonella dragged her into the creaky gondola. I don't like heights, Carol muttered, gripping the safety bar. Then you'll love the view, Antonella said, grinning. As the Ferris wheel reached its peak, Carol's anxiety melted away. The view was stunning, the town below bathed in golden light. She glanced at Antonella, who was looking at her, not the view. What? Carol asked, blushing. Nothing, Antonella said, her smile soft. The car hummed softly as the highway stretched endlessly before them. Carol stared out the window, her thoughts swirling as Antonella drove in comfortable silence. Every mile brought them closer to their destination and further into uncharted emotional territory. When Antonella pulled into a rest stop for gas, Carol offered to take over driving, needing the distraction. Antonella agreed, stretching her arms and stepping out to grab snacks. Left alone for a moment, Carol rested her head against the steering wheel. What happens after this? She wondered. She didn't know when it had happened. Maybe when Antonella fixed the flat tire, or during their late-night motel conversation, or even on that Ferris wheel. But somewhere along the way, Carol had let Antonella in. And now, the idea of going back to her ordinary life felt unbearable. Antonella returned, handing her a bag of chips and sliding into the passenger seat. They drove on in silence, but it wasn't the tense, awkward silence of their first hours together. This was something different, loaded but unspoken. At the next overlook, Carol couldn't keep it inside any longer. She pulled over abruptly, the tires crunching against gravel. Antonella raised an eyebrow. What's going on? Carol stepped out, pacing a few steps before turning back to face her. I can't just pretend this didn't happen, she blurted. Antonella frowned, stepping closer. What are you talking about? This, Carol gestured between them. Us. Whatever this is. Antonella's face softened. I've been waiting for you to say that. Carol blinked. You have? Antonella chuckled. I wasn't sure you'd notice, honestly. You're a little stubborn. Carol laughed despite herself. You're one to talk. Antonella took a step closer, her gaze steady. I don't want this to end, Carol. Carol looked down, her heart pounding. Neither do I. But what happens now? When we get there, Antonella reached out, gently tilting Carol's chin up to meet her eyes. We figure it out. Together. Their kiss was slow, tender, and full of unspoken promises. For the first time, Carol felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding venue was a dream come to life, a sprawling countryside estate with whitewashed walls, blooming gardens, and twinkling fairy lights draped across the trees. As Carol and Antonella walked into the ceremony, they were greeted by a soft breeze carrying the scent of roses and lavender. They slipped into the back row just as the music began. Carol felt Antonella's hand brush hers as they sat, and a soft warmth spread through her chest. She risked a glance at Antonella, who was watching the bride and groom with a small, sincere smile on her face. During the vows, Carol couldn't help but steal glances at Antonella. She wasn't just admiring her beauty, though Antonella looked stunning in her sleek black dress, but the way she seemed so present, so fully engaged with the moment. It was magnetic. Beautiful, isn't it? Antonella whispered, leaning close enough that Carol could feel the warmth of her breath. Yeah, Carol murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was talking about the wedding or Antonella. The reception was an explosion of color, laughter, and music. String lights illuminated the garden, casting a golden glow over the tables laden with food and flowers. The DJ played upbeat songs that had everyone flocking to the dance floor. Carol and Antonella found themselves mingling with guests, laughing over shared stories of Lucy and her antics. At one point, Antonella challenged Carol to a champagne drinking contest. You're on, Carol said, grinning as she picked up a flute. Several glasses later, they were both laughing uncontrollably, leaning on each other for support. You're terrible at this, Antonella teased, her cheeks flushed from the alcohol. Says the woman who just spilled half her drink on her dress, Carol shot back, giggling. Their playful banter carried them to the dance floor. At first, Carol hesitated, awkwardly shifting her weight from one foot to the other. But Antonella wasn't having it. Loosen up, Antonella said, grabbing Carol's hands and spinning her around. Carol finally gave in, letting herself sway to the music. Soon, they were moving together in perfect rhythm, their laughter blending with the upbeat tempo. Carol couldn't remember the last time she felt so carefree. As the night wore on, the music slowed. Antonella placed her hands gently on Carol's waist, pulling her close. Look at you, finally having fun, Antonella teased softly. Carol smiled up at her, her heart pounding. I think you bring it out of me. Antonella's smile was soft, her gaze intense. Good. Because I'm not done yet. Later, as the reception began to wind down, they found themselves on the patio, the night air cool against their flushed skin. The garden lights flickered softly, and the sound of distant laughter drifted through the air. Antonella reached for Carol's hand, her thumb tracing small circles against her skin. You know, this whole trip, it's been more than I ever expected. Carol tilted her head, studying her. What do you mean? I didn't think someone like you would fit into my life, Antonella admitted. But now I can't imagine it without you. Carol's chest tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't find the words. I feel the same way. I didn't think I needed anyone until I met you. Antonella squeezed her hand. So, what if we kept going? You said you wanted to travel. Let's do it. Together. Carol hesitated, her mind racing. I'd have to quit my job. Okay, Antonella said simply. Carol blinked. Okay. Yeah, Antonella said, her voice steady. You've been miserable there, Carol. You said it yourself. And maybe this is the chance you've been waiting for. Carol looked down at their joined hands, her heart thundering. What about after? When we're done traveling? Antonella smiled, her eyes sparkling. Then we settle down somewhere. And maybe we start that gym I've been dreaming about. You can help with the design, and we'll make it a place where everyone feels welcome. The idea filled Carol with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She looked up at Antonella, her decision made. Let's do it. Let's quit, travel, and then make your dream a reality. Antonella's smile widened, and she leaned in, kissing Carol softly. You're incredible, you know that? Carol laughed, her cheeks flushing. I'm just following your lead. As they sat there under the stars, mapping out a future they hadn't even realized they wanted, Carol felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, as Carol packed her things, a thought struck her. Why had Lucy put her in a car with Antonella in the first place? It seemed random, but Lucy never did anything without a reason. Curiosity got the better of her. Carol pulled out her phone and sent Lucy a message. Hey, quick question. Why did you pair me with Antonella for the carpool? Lucy's reply came almost immediately, even when it's the first morning after her wedding. But that's Lucy. Oh, so you finally noticed? Carol frowned. Noticed what? A few moments later, her phone buzzed again. I tried setting you two up so many times, but neither of you would go for it. Antonella always said she was too busy, and you always said dating wasn't a priority. I figure if I stuck you in a car together, you wouldn't have a choice but to talk. Carol's jaw dropped. You're kidding. Nope. Lucy replied. And, judging by the way you two were dancing last night, I'd say my plan worked. Carol stared at the screen, a mix of disbelief and amusement washing over her. She looked over at Antonella, who was leaning against the car, scrolling through her phone. You won't believe what Lucy just told me, Carol said as she walked over. Antonella looked up, intrigued. What? She's been trying to set us up for months, Carol said, showing her the messages. Antonella read them, then burst out laughing. That sneaky little. Carol joined in her laughter, shaking her head. I guess we owe her one. Antonella grinned, slipping an arm around Carol's waist. I'm not complaining. They shared a kiss under the morning sun, their laughter still lingering in the air. A week later, Carol and Antonella set off on a cross-country road trip, this time with no specific destination in mind. Carol brought her new vintage camera, while Antonella mapped out hiking trails and roadside attractions. Every mile brought new memories, new stories, and a deeper connection. What started as an inconvenient carpool had turned into the greatest adventure of their lives. And as Carol snapped a photo of Antonella laughing at a quirky roadside diner, she realized that sometimes the best journeys are the ones you never planned.